My name is Lacey Leone McLaughlin. This is Unfolding Leadership.
Fred Mwangaguhunga started off as an attorney on Wall Street, but soon became an entrepreneur, funding and running a door-to-door laundry service with elite clients like Mariah, Carey, and the Victoria's Secret fashion show. After his successful exit from the startup business, Fred founded MediaTakeout.com and has grown it into the #1 urban celebrity online news outlet with an audience of over 40 million monthly visitors. Called a rising star of new media by the New York Times and one of the industry's top media people by the New York Observer, Fred has appeared on many top-tier national media outlets like Access Hollywood, Bravo, GQ, Wendy Williams, CBS, BET, Bloomberg, Sirius XM, and the list goes on and on. What a treat to have Fred on today. Let's get this conversation started.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So the more that I have learned about you, the more intrigued I am by your journey and where you are today. So if you wouldn't mind, start the listeners off with what you've done, where you've been, what you're doing today, and how you got here.
Yeah, I think if you kind of look through my life, you'd see that I've been in a bunch of kind of oddly not connected places. But I think, after, you get a little bit older, you get some wisdom, and I think I've been able to kind of weave a pattern through it. So let me just kind of explain where I started from. I started as a practicing lawyer. I went to law school and business school, graduated a long time ago. And I guess I came out of law school and went directly into corporate law, like a lot of lawyers did. At the time, I kind of, how I got my way into law is a lot of times people just really love the law. They love to argue. That wasn't my case. I was just the college student that was pretty smart, probably not smart enough to go to medical school. So they just told you, go to law. And so I was kind of getting good enough grades to get on this law track. It seemed like a great profession when I was 19 years old. And I then got into law school, a really good school. And so I was like, okay, here I am. I'm going to be this lawyer. And it wasn't really me making that determination about what I wanted to be. It was kind of the circumstances around me kind of pushing me in this direction that I didn't particularly want to go, but it was hard to turn down because it just seemed like such a great career path. And I think a lot of people find themselves on that. And before I graduated, I decided, I was like, hey, let me just kind of take a fallback position and get an MBA too. The school was lucky enough to say, hey, look, if you get an MBA, instead of having to do it in 2 years and then 3 years of law school, which would be a total of 5 years, you could smush the two together and get them in a year less of school. So I was like, great, let me just go in there, get my MBA. I get to kind of look around at the world of business, which I felt a kind of a pull towards the world of business, but it wasn't like as big, I was selling, stuff on a corner when I was 5 either. I didn't really know. While I was in business school, I absolutely fell in love with the idea of entrepreneurship. And it's interesting because now, when you talk to people about business, they talk about entrepreneurship. When I was in business school, and it wasn't, it was far back along, but not that far back, most of the people in the business school that I went to, almost none of them were interested in entrepreneurship. Almost everybody was interested in either going to Wall Street and being an investment banker because they make a ton of money, or going to management consulting, where you could go to kind of Wall Street adjacent type firms and make a ton of money. And the idea of being an entrepreneur and kind of going out there and starting everything from scratch wasn't a particularly attractive or enticing thing, especially for people that had kind of, cream of the crop business degrees. And so, but for me, I was like, this is where I was. This is, of all the schools, the courses I took, you take courses in finance, you take courses in, M&A and all that stuff. That was kind of boring to me. But the entrepreneurship classes were great. I think I took almost every entrepreneurship course that the school offered.
So you graduate from university with a dual degree, business, but a focus in entrepreneurship, law degree. And then what happens?
And then I actually found a couple of seasoned business owners that believed in me while I'm in business school. And they were like, hey, here's this guy. He's going to this Ivy League business school. Hey, do you think you can help us raise some money on Wall Street? And so I was like, yeah, I think I can. And here I was, I think it was maybe like 21, 22, something like that. And I was like, okay, let me go. I went right down to Wall Street. I was in, the offices of Goldman Sachs and these great big Wall Street places. And we actually managed to raise about $15 million for the company. Where I actually managed to raise
while you're getting a dual degree.
While I'm in school. So this is like, I'm like either cutting class or like in between classes, I'm running down, getting on the subway, and then going out there, helping raise money. On the weekends, I'm like flying out to LA because that was where the company was, and just kind of helping them out. And so, it was really kind of an amazing, and it was an amazing experience to be so young, to have that much responsibility. Because, when you come out of business school, usually they give you the lowest jobs and you have to work your way up. But this time I went straight to the top. I was there, effectively the CFO of this company. And it was just amazing. It was exhilarating. It was right in the middle of kind of the first internet bubble. And I just knew I was going to be a billionaire. And so when I was getting ready to graduate from law school, from law school / business school, I had all these law firms were coming to me. They were trying to give me job offers. And I was like, I don't need your job. Don't you know I'm going to be a billionaire in the next, year and a half? Once this company goes public, and then, me and Mark Cuban are going to be flying around in private jets. And obviously that's not what happened. For those of you that don't know, the first internet bubble burst very suddenly. And all of the money dried up, and most of the startup community at the time went bankrupt, including the company that I was in. So kind of fresh out the gate, I had probably my biggest, and even to date, probably my biggest business disappointment. We had this gigantic failure right at the start of your career. I got to tell you, it was an embarrassing thing too, because here I was, my classmates were watching me going back. Look at this kid, Fred, like the wonder kid, going back and raising this money and doing this stuff. And I had to basically put my tail between my legs and just kind of regroup. And the whole world, it was pretty public that, what happened. So the whole world knew kind of what happened to my, this business career that I had. I've been humbled plenty of times before in my life. Before that. So that certainly wasn't the biggest humbling that I had. It was one of a series. And so while it would have been devastating, I think, to a lot of people, with me, I was able to just kind of like keep things into perspective. And I think my biggest thing was to just look at the circumstance and just say, okay, there's nothing good is going to come out of this, but what can I learn from this? What did I do wrong? Where did I make a bad decision in this, right? Like, obviously it's not all my fault. There's macroeconomic reasons why this went bad, but what is it that I could have done to ensure or to make this more successful? And I took some time to kind of reflecting on my own failures. And I think that was, while it was my biggest failure, it was probably the turning point in my business career. And I thought of business one way before that, and I have thought of business a completely different way ever since there.
Interesting. So kind of get kicked in the butt. You're flying high, going to school, doing these amazing things, raising $15 million as a 20-something. Think it's headed in one direction. Get kicked in the butt a little bit. Forgive me for saying that. Stop, reflect, pivot, learn a whole hell of a lot. And then what happens?
I was lucky enough, while I was telling all those law firms, hey, look, I don't want your job, whatever. One of them was lucky enough to say, hey, listen, kid, I know you think you're really good, but we're going to give you this offer. If this whole thing blows up, we'll still take you. And so I called the lady up and I was like, hey, remember when you gave me that offer and you said if this whole thing blew up, were you serious about it? And she was like, let me give you a call back. And so she went back and talked with people at the firm. And they called me back. They said, yes, Fred, we'd love to have you. And so that kind of, at least I was able to kind of to get a job. It was, I knew that my future wasn't going to be in law, but I had loans to come and due. I had to get an apartment.
Everybody likes to eat
something.
Food.
Right. Eating is good. Yeah. So I went to the firm, and it was a great firm, and they were excited to have me because, while I was looking at this kind of great thing, this bust up of my career as like a failure, they were actually really, like, a lot of the especially the senior attorneys there, they were actually really impressed that I had the guts to kind of take that that incentive to go out there and do it. So it wasn't at all seen as a failure to the people over at the firm, and they actually respected me a lot more because of it. And, that was the first time to just say, hey, this maybe things weren't so bad. Plus, I mean, listen, when you're failing at 23, 24, whatever it was that I was, you don't, I had no kids, I had no family, right? Like I was used to eating ramen noodles and crackers. So I had no money to lose, right? Like it wasn't like going bankrupt when I was already, $100,000 in debt from student loans. I had no money anyway before and after. So, I didn't really lose anything other than kind of this, it was more a blow to the ego rather than kind of a financial attitude.
Yeah. I love that. Often in the coaching work that I do, the question that I'll ask is, what's the worst thing that can happen? So this goes horribly awry. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? And it sounds like you asked yourself that and you're like, hey, I'm no different than I am right now. So let's give it a go.
Yeah, and I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs now too, and especially now in this current environment, there's, we're going through kind of a readjustment, and there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are largely in the position that I was in, where, you thought you were flying high, you had this really good job, maybe you were working for a company that looked like it was going places, and maybe things are now a lot more uncertain, and you're wondering like, what do we do, right? And I'll tell you the major lesson that I've learned in this, it's that business is not that complicated. You can see so many business books about, this mindset and this is what you have to do. You're creating a product or a service. You're trying to sell it to a customer. You're trying to take care of your customer and make sure that your customer is happy so that they'll come back to you again. And that is all business is. And if you realize that, and it's not about anything else other than that, it's not about, metrics and KPIs and all so those are all just kind of, subsets of this bigger thing. And so often you kind of get caught up in all the other stuff of it that you miss what you're really trying to do. So in my case, we were working, the company was a telecommunications startup, and had some really complicated technology. And I had no idea how it worked, why it worked, nor did I even care. All I knew is that it was going in the right direction. Everybody told me the telecom was the right industry to be in. We were able to raise a lot of money in it. I knew how to kind of talk the lingo and kind of kick the buzzwords around. I knew a lot of the players in the game, so I could talk with them. So I had all of the accoutrements of kind of what a successful business person would look like. But I had no idea what the business was. I had no idea who the customers were. I wasn't particularly interested in keeping the customers happy. I didn't care what the technology was, whether it was good or bad. So long as it was moving in the right direction and everything was going in the right direction, I really didn't even care. And that was kind of the big thing that came to me. And I was like, I am never, ever, ever going to do it. I'm going to know exactly what everything is, and I'm going to be whatever business I'm in, whether it's a complicated business, whether it's a simple business, whatever kind it is, I'm going to be able to understand it on the kind of umbrella way of who's your customer, how do you keep the customers happy, what is it that you're doing, how do you improve, who are your employees, who are your key employees. Those are the kind of things, the kind of like basic business stuff that if you're talking to a guy who owns a fruit stand on the side of the road, or you're talking to a person who runs a Fortune 500 company, they both are focused largely on the same things.
Yeah. Well, and I'm reading between the lines here, but yes, it sounds like you wanted to know the business, but it also got you to a place where you're like, I want to give a shit about the business that I'm spending my life around.
Right. That was another thing too. I mean, I think it's with me, it's a little bit different. I think a lot of times people have a passion, right? And I hear a lot of times people are like, oh, I have this passion to do this, and I kind of do. My passion is kind of like serving the customer. And so, the first business that I started, so after I went to law school, after I went to the law firm, I was there for 3 or 4 years, saving up money and thinking of business ideas and trying to figure out a new business that could take into account the stuff that I learned in the past, and the stuff that I had in business school. I brought in a partner who ended up being my wife. And we decided to launch a laundry service, which is completely different from the telecom startup company. Although it was internet based, which, now is kind of obvious, but at the time was not all that obvious of a connection to make internet and laundry. And so when we started the laundry business, and then so a lot of people are like, hey, this is kind of weird. You're like a corporate lawyer, and you're like a, you know, you're doing this telecom stuff. Like, how do you get into this laundry business? And the idea was always kind of the same, which was I always try and look at things from the customer standpoint, not the business standpoint. Right? The business is going to kind of like work itself out, but I'm trying to see like what is it that the customers actually want, and where are there areas of the world where customers really, 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 really want these things, but for whatever reason they can't get it. And so I was just kind of like, hey, why can't I or any of the people that are like me get this service that we all want, that we're all willing to pay for?
Yeah, yeah. A theme. I love the theme of simplicity, right? From a leadership perspective, it's like there's all this stuff going around, raising millions of dollars for this startup, all of this competing priorities in the laundry service, and you're an attorney still working, and all of it just sort of cut to the chase. And it's how are we going to get this business done? And what do the customers need? So jump us ahead now to what you're doing today, because your customer is quite different. If I'm thinking about your customer correctly, which I'm not sure I am, but your customer is quite different, and what you're doing today is a bit different as well. So where are you today, and who's your customer?
So now I started a business 16 years ago called MediaTakeout.com. We are the largest in terms of audience African American news site in the world. We have about 35 million people a month that come to our site to get primarily news and with a focus on entertainment. So, the best way I kind of get to kind of like have people understand what we do is we're sort of like TMZ, but we have more of an urban focus. We focus more so on African American celebrities.
Okay. That's cool. First of all, super cool. And your numbers are a little off. I was like looking at you're close to pretty much 40 million. It's looking like these days when I Google. That's huge. I mean, it's crazy. That's a really big deal. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So from a leadership perspective, how are you thinking about the customer? How do you bring people on? And talk to me a little bit about your team, because I've got to assume it takes quite a bit to run a site that large, serving that many customers. So I just want to hear how you sort of think about the business, how you think about the customer today, and kind of what that all looks like.
I think a lot of it comes down. So leadership to me is about kind of setting culture and kind of setting a vision. And what that means from kind of like a culture standpoint is if there's ever any conflict between, let's say, profitability and customer is always going to be profit. It's always going to come first over profitability. So, the culture that you're trying to put in is not simply to get to be efficient and kind of getting things done on a day-to-day basis, but it's to create this enterprise that's going to have longevity. And so my focus is on the day-to-day is kind of setting that goal. And the best way to do that is to set the culture, to bring people in, to always talk about that, and to just have it ingrained in your DNA. And I think, every company has their subtle kind of culture there. And ours is a customer-focused culture, which I think, it works for us. It worked for us in the laundry business, which we eventually sold, works for us very well here. I'm not saying that that's the only way to do it, that there may be other ways to do it, but that's kind of what, that's my main job, is to kind of do that, to lead in that way. And then the second part of leadership, like I said, is to set the goals for the future. And that's the hardest part, because that's where things are, it's difficult because so perfect example is we're actually in the middle of an acquisition of another company. So in addition to having kind of our internal guys working through it, you have all these accountants, you have these investment bankers, you have these lawyers. And what it struck me is, whenever you talk to any accountant, accountants always think about the past. So they'll always say, oh, what did this company do last year? What were the numbers looking like last year? And if you tell them anything about, yeah, but this is what they're going to do in the future, they're like, oh, how do you know what the future is, right? But it's just the way accountants think. And it's not that there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. And if you are going to be a successful accountant, you have to think like that. If we talk to any banker, the bankers are only talking about this is what the market for this company is. They only talk about the present, right? Like you start talking about the past, they're like, oh yeah, whatever, but the past is past. Who knows what the future is? This is what's going for right now. This is what the market looks like right now. This is what you have to do. And then there's me, who my entire job is to only think about the future. And it's kind of a lonely experience to kind of be there because there really aren't very many people, and everyone thinks that they think about the future. They're like, oh yeah, I always think about the future. But then when you tell them what they're thinking about, they'll refer to the past if they have that kind of past thinking, or they'll tell you what's kind of going on today, which is kind of what's going on today. So it's kind of lonely when you're talking about this stuff. And that's part of what being a leader is.
So we know the farther you go in an organization, the less feedback that you get, the more you're connecting with who used to be your peers, all of that. And you just used the word lonely. Are you all right being lonely these days? How do you manage that?
Yeah, no. It's not a lonely kind of like, I have my wife. She's great.
Professionally lonely. Lonely.
Professionally, I gotta say, it's really it's gotten like especially as you get more successful, it gets harder. I gotta say, and so
what
ends up happening
research around it. So knowing that is huge, first of all. But go ahead.
So what ends up happening is you find these other CEOs at other companies, right? Like I meet a couple of them. One that I've gotten particularly friendly with runs a company completely outside of what it is that I'm doing. And we just talk. We don't talk about the business stuff. We talk about like just general, like broader things, right? We met over the summer. We were at like a party and we were having cocktails. And I happened to mention that this is something that I was going through. And he was like, oh my God, I went through something just like that. And we had like a 20-minute conversation just about that, right? Yeah. And then he turned to me and he's like, I'm thinking about it because he's been really successful for a very long time, but he's still a young guy. And he was like, I'm thinking about retiring, right? Like, they offered me a bunch of money, not that he needs it, but he's thinking about retiring. And I was like, before you make any decision, because I had just been having a conversation from another CEO that was really successful, young, and he retired. And he was telling me how he absolutely hates it. He thinks it's the worst mistake that he's ever made. Because so I was like, listen, before you make any decision on this, I just want to tell you, I talked to this other guy, and this is what he said, and whatever. And it was like one of those conversations that me and him we kind of like just happened to see each other, and it was in a party, and we ended up talking for probably a lot longer than we expected to. And like within that time, like I think he left that conversation thinking like, oh my God, I got like this incredibly valuable information on this issue. For me, and I thought the exact same thing for him.
Yeah, I love that. The value of shared experiences, regardless of industry, expertise, where you're spending your time. That's great. So you talk a lot about the customer. You talk about how you simplify things and the focus is on the customer. Both concepts I love. 40 million people looking at your site every day, everything going on in the world. How do you manage those two things? I mean, there's just a lot. I can't imagine putting content out into the world like you do right now.
Yeah, I think it's, and this is all to the team now. Now this is, my part is vision kind of all on this. Now you have the day-to-day kind of getting the site together. It's a team. It's just like any news desk. It runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You have shifts, you have people that kind of understand where they're going. You have layers of management to kind of make sure that everybody is doing and following onto it. But you also have people that are committed, committed not just for the paycheck and whatever else. Obviously, people have to get paid. You want to pay people above market to the extent that you can. But the bigger thing is they have to really, really love and really want to do what it is that they're doing. I know the idea of like celebrity and celebrity news sounds like a fantastic job. And don't get me wrong, it's the best job that I've ever had. But if you don't love this, it's like winning a cake eating contest and getting more cake as the prize. because you're doing a lot of it and you're doing it every day. And a lot of times you see how the sausage is made. And sometimes it's not that pretty. And some of these celebrities that seem really nice on the outside are not the nicest people when you get to know them. I could honestly say that the team, certainly the team of writers, they think like, oh my God, I have to go to work to kind of like get this information out to the people because this is what they need. And when you have a team of people that thinks like that, which is exactly the way that I think, and it's part of it is the hiring the right people. 90% of it is that, and then it's like cultivating them, making sure that they can feel fulfilled in the roles that you have. That's kind of how you kind of. That's how we get the magic of the company that get around for 17 years and get 40 million.
You talked a lot about pivots in your early career journey. You've talked a little bit about how people think this job might look, right? It's exciting. It's celebrities, it's parties, it's, events and things to that extent. So I'm guessing you've had to have some conversations around helping people pivot as well. Talk to me a little bit about how you've helped people think through a pivot when they've gotten to work for you and it wasn't what they thought and maybe this wasn't what they wanted to do. How have you helped people through that?
Yeah, I think it's hard because it's important to have, the respect for the person. And remember, they're in the best position to guide their career, right? Like they're working on their career. I'm working on a company. And, for as long as the two paths kind of work together, that's the season that we're in each other's lives, right? And so I try not to dissuade people if they have, if there's something that they really feel called to do, right? Because there's plenty of things that I've felt called to do. When I went to the law firm, they wanted me to stay there, but I felt called to do something else. And, they didn't try to restrict me or talk me out of it. They actually encouraged me to do it. And so I try to pass that on to people too. But I also try and pass on kind of knowledge and information too. And just kind of like after you've been around this game for a while, you see that there is a lot of ebbs and flows. And sometimes something looks like a great opportunity and everybody's jumping on it. Right? And it looks like a great opportunity today. But remember me, my focus is kind of on the 2 to 3 years out. And I could already see that this trend isn't going to last. So, I'll try and pass that on to people. Sometimes they'll take it, sometimes they won't. I tell you, I've been incredibly lucky with our team in that. And I could pretty much say that to the extent that once we got someone to join the team and they're actually fully integrated in the team, we had some people come on and just figured that this wasn't for them. We rarely ever had anyone leave. In fact, I'm not sure that we ever had anyone leave.
Wow.
So yeah, just kind of crazy. Well, I mean, like I said, it is a fantastic job. We were working from home for 10 years, right? So 10 years, the idea that you could work from home in 2016, we were like, yeah, fully work from home.
Yeah.
Completely remote. You never have to come into the office. Just do your work and everything is fine. So we've had a lot of success with our employees. But, to what you're saying, which is kind of like, how do you talk to someone when there are kind of pivots? And we've have certain pivots. I think one, probably the biggest, was just around for 16 years, we kind of were there for kind of the birth of social media. And so part of, or what a lot of many companies were dealing with at the time is a lot of kind of their biggest talent in-house were thinking about leaving and going off and becoming kind of social media stars and kind of doing their own thing. And so I never held anyone back and said, don't do this. Obviously, love everyone on the team. We'd like to keep them. There's one person that she was like, I think I kind of want to do this. And I was like, okay, look, you can do it. We're not going to hold you back. You can do whatever you want. Tell everybody what you're going to be doing. But I was, before you kind of do this, let me just kind of explain to you the economics of this. And I think a lot of times people don't really know how the economics of social media works. I mean, you see Mr. Beast and he's making, hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's like, hey, everybody's making a lot of money. I can tell you that the vast, vast, vast majority of people that you see on social media even the ones that you think have millions of followers are not making anywhere near the amount of money that you're talking about. And then there's kind of production costs that come into place. So, when I explained to her kind of what it would take, like, look, this is what, and I have the numbers, right? Like I said, this is what the numbers are. This is kind of what it would be. And the other thing is we pay our employees really, really well, way more than they make anywhere else. So I'm like, you're literally like giving up this fantastic salary and you're going to this where you're going to make way less money, even if you're successful. Like, doesn't make sense, right? So, but like I said, without stopping her from doing this, because I actually care about her, right? Like, I have friends on top of this, right? I could hate to see her go, but if she would go and she would be really successful, that'd be fantastic. And so I think just kind of like using and imparting my wisdom on them, I think is important. But then at the same time, not trying to hold someone from what it is that I think they really feel called to do, because no one did that to me. So I think that's the way that I would handle it.
If we were to go and talk to your employees and we asked them what kind of leader you are, what do you think they'd say?
They'd probably say he's incredibly easygoing. He's not particularly critical. Gives us a lot of space to kind of do what we want to do. I think that's probably what they'd say.
Excellent. If I asked them,
who knows?
no, I love it. I
bad
love
stuff
it. If I was to ask them what you could work on, what do you think they'd say? What you could do better?
I think they'd say that sometimes I probably give too much freedom, and that maybe I should give a little bit more guidance. And I think that would be a fair criticism. I think it's always kind of like a balancing act with it, because I think a lot of times people, particularly when you're talking to people that are incredibly talented and have been doing whatever it is that you're doing for a long time, finding ways to adjust kind of what they do without offending them, because these people are really, really talented. Or not necessarily even offending them, but like just knocking them off of their game. Right? Yeah. You don't want them to start thinking like, oh, you know what, Fred wants me to do it this way, and then they start doing their job in a way that's not necessarily to their talents. So I think a lot of it is just kind of like me kind of seeing the talent and then kind of going and then finding ways to kind of say, hey, maybe we can do this, or maybe we can do that. But I think the one thing that I do think that probably does make sense is to having a lot more of a formal kind of review structure and kind of like have a lot more open dialogue that I don't really have.
One of the models that I think is really helpful, particularly with talented teams, and all teams are talented in their own way, but it sounds like you empower the heck out of this team. One of the models is teach versus tell, right? Just because they're really smart, just because they're really bright, just because they're really good at their job, doesn't mean that they're not looking to learn from you. So thinking about it in these moments, which is this a teach moment, or is this sort of a tell moment? Is this an opportunity where we have a quick conversation, they know what they want to do, I'm on board, and we move them forward, right? Or is this an opportunity where they do all of those things really, really right, but they're looking to me for a little bit of coaching, a little bit of guidance, a little bit of something so they can enhance those skills that are already really good. So it's often we as the leaders are like, I don't want to step on their toes, or I don't want to get in their way, or I don't want to put them off their game. But we forget that they're looking to us as the boss, as the leader, as the driver of the business for development and growth and direction and conversation as well, right? So sometimes we're trying not to offend, step on toes, and we forget that, they might need something from us as well. So one of the things to think about is teach versus tell. Is this one of those two opportunities, or we just keep doing what we're doing because it's neither?
Yeah, no, I think that there's makes a lot of sense. That's something that I'm definitely trying to work on.
Yeah. Well, I'll be interested kind of following that journey, because it is an interesting one, particularly it's a whole heck of a lot easier when you have a team of people that are learning, developing, growing, sort of not at the top of their game, and you've got a skilled team, we forget that they still want to develop and grow because they're already doing everything so well, which it sounds like your team is, by your success, by your numbers, by your followership. Clearly they are. And then also the other piece to that is just ask them, what do you need from me? What would be helpful? What do you want? What are those other things, opportunities, growth, experiences, topics to write about that may add some value to how you think about your work differently?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's probably you want to kind of have something that's just a little bit more. We used to have like weekly meetings, but the weekly meetings kind of disappeared because it was just kind of like, oh, what the hell are we going to talk about?
And there is nothing worse than being in a meeting that has no purpose.
Right. Trust me, I've been enough of those. I've been enough of those already. I'm not going to call them myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about your biggest leadership success today, sum that up in a couple of words for me.
Probably the biggest success would be putting together this team. And part of it is because, now it's kind of, it would be, I think, a little bit more obvious the type of people that you look for. When we started Media Takeout, there really was no professional blog world out there. So you had a lot of kind of print writers who were used to writing one article a week, some even one article a month. And then you had the blog world, or kind of the digital world, where you would have to get people to do 10 or 15 articles, sometimes 15 articles a day, right? And there was this kind of thing where there really was no talent in the marketplace, no real quality talent in the marketplace that was willing to accept that. Like if you got a talented person, they'd be like, why the heck am I going to come and work for you? And like, when I could go and work over there. It was what we had to do, and at the time it was largely me, is I had to find these talented people that worked at these companies, convince them to shift. Sometimes you'd find people that just graduated from school that would otherwise be running these companies, and you'd have to bring them into the fold to convince them that this is the way of the future, and kind of, get their talent, get them to use their talent in the way that I wanted them to use it, not the way that they were kind of formally trained to use it, or the way that the market expounded that they were supposed to use it. That was incredibly difficult thing to do, because, I'm just kind of going back. It was just to find one person, and then to find two, and then three, and then four. It was really, really difficult. And then to just kind of like create this culture where everyone not only bought into it, but everybody recognized, yes, this is the future, and kind of worked and helped kind of come up with a lot of the the workflows that we have today. And then, like I said, to hold them all for so many years.
That means you're doing something
to
right.
Keep them, right. That's the other thing too, right? Like, because you really want to empower them, right? And a lot of it is just like, sometimes it's keeping them is like, there were a lot of them were women, right? So they maybe they were 26 years old, they got married and they had kids, and they were like, okay, me and my husband, we're moving to Georgia, and I'm gonna have kids. Now she has 5 kids, and she still works. And I'm like, work whenever you can, drop them off, go to preschool, work here, get an hour here, get an hour there, do whatever you can to just kind of come in. Like, we are 100% flexible on what it is that you can do, because I know that she's dedicated to it, and I know that she wants to work. Obviously, she has other bigger things to think about other than work, but she's incredibly talented, and she wants to do this. And so a lot of it is, so a lot of times when you talk about kind of keeping employees, a lot of times why you lose them is because life changes. I think a lot of it is them being flexible, obviously, with us, and us being flexible to employees, because at the end of the day, that's the company, right? The company is a name, some woo-woo out there, right? Me and then them. So we got to make sure every piece of it is taken care of.
Yeah. It's flexible work environment before the flexible work environment was cool, right? And it goes back to the very first theme that you put out on our interview and our conversation, which is keep it simple. We don't need to we don't need to complicate this. I have a talented person who has a change of life circumstance. How do we continue to do the work within those current needs now? We don't need to think about it. We don't need to overdo it. We don't need to think about splits. We don't need to think about all these other things. She wants to work. I want her to work. How do we make that happen?
And that's exactly how I think about it. And that's exactly how she thinks about it too.
Yeah, no, I know. It's great. It's great. And it's so consistent with everything else you've talked about, right? It's the focus on the individual, focus on the customer. It's about the simplicity. It's about having the conversations. It's about setting that culture, all of it. And it's very clear that there's some underlying themes that run through everything that you've done and everything you continue to do.
One other thing though, also is just like having a place where an environment where everybody is having fun, you know what I mean? That's the other part of it. I've worked at places where, all the politics and the drama and the whatever going behind it, it's, a lot of times you actually like what you're doing, but the environment is just a place that you don't want to be. This is about having fun, keeping it professional, and keeping it moving, right?
So if somebody is listening to this interview and it's caused them to reflect a little bit and maybe where they're at right now isn't where they want to be, what's the one piece of advice that you'd give them that will end this conversation on?
I'd say ask your mother, ask your best friend, ask, maybe your first boyfriend that you're still friends with. Ask them to just write 4 or 5 words to describe yourself. Right? And then just look at the words. We all ask ourselves, we're all going to say we're really smart, we're really dedicated, you know what I mean? We're all going to do ourselves, right? Yeah. But they're going to tell you other things, right? Like it's stuff that you might not even really think about, because a lot of times we're just so focused on the smart and the whatever, smart, hardworking, dedicated. Those are the things that we actually think are important. But there's so many other things that we have inside of ourselves. It's your talents, your God-given gifts. And start really focusing on that. Figuring out how to build a business around your gifts. You're obviously talented because you decided to do it. You've been doing enough research to find this podcast and listen all the way through. So use your God-given gifts. And like I said, hopefully you can find them or you can get reintroduced to them. And try and figure out how to get a business or career opportunity that uses those gifts. Try and integrate them into your life, into your business life. And I think you'll find that you will get a lot more success and get a lot further wherever you want to go using those gifts.
Yeah. Well, you've clearly done that quite well. Congratulations on everything you have accomplished and what an amazing journey it's been. And I look forward to watching it continue to unfold. And thank you for joining us today. It was a great conversation. I know our listeners are going to get a ton out of it.
Thanks. Have a good time.
Thanks, Fred. What I'm left with is, how are you helping things be simple? How are you keeping focused on the individual people within your organization and the consumers you are serving? How are you actively creating a culture of respect? And on a personal level, what are your gifts and talents that are helping moving your organization and the people that you serve forward? This is Unfolding Leadership. Thanks for listening.